Hi everybody, welcome to Financial Reporting for SAP using Alteryx and DVW Analytics. This is Darren Walton here from DVW Analytics. I'll be your guide today. I am joined on the session by Ian James, but he's going to be a very much a silent partner. So if you have any questions you'd like to have answered during the session, please add them into the chat application you have there, and Ian will do his best to answer them. Okay, right, let's crack on. Okay, so simple agenda for today. We'll start off with just taking a look at the SAP financial reporting landscape from an Alteryx perspective. And then we'll move on to what we see as the three big Alteryx connector for SAP tools for use within financial reporting. Those of you who are already using our software will recognize these, I'm sure. These are the tools that allow us to access table data, work with transaction codes, T-Codes, as well as BW Queries, query views, and so on and so forth. We have some examples to show you, which will give you hope to give some ideas of the art of the possible. And we'll finish off with a little bit of chat around how we go about automating these workflows, these processes within Alteryx, making use of Alteryx Server. All right, so here we go. Here's our view of the world. So I'll start actually from the bottom up with this diagram here. At the very bottom, we have our core SAP systems from a finance perspective. These are just a list of the partial list of the systems that we support within Alteryx using our software, but you'll probably recognize these today. These are both the core transactional systems, representing, if you like, the past, present, and future of SAP, specifically SAP R3, SAP ECC, sometimes referred to as SAP ERP, and SAP S/4HANA. Right, we offer full support for these core SAP systems. And in the data warehousing side of things, we also work with SAP BW, BW on HANA, as well as BW for HANA, and many, many, many more. Now, within these core transactional systems and the data warehousing systems, there's a lot of functionality that you're using today around finance. So whether it's being for our financial and statutory reporting, whether it's our tax management, AR, AP, and so on and so forth, there's a lot of functionality. And as users within your business transact with the SAP system, recording sales orders, posting POs, entering journal entries, data is flown in to the system and into the databases within that system. Now, we can access that data through a number of different sources. Right, and so the way we can interact with SAP from Alteryx will vary according to particular use cases and also where the majority of your data resides. Right, so the top level here of the diagram, we have a little picture of some of our key tools. Again, these will be quite familiar to some of you, completely new to others, and hopefully you become a little bit more familiar with the idea behind these. So the DVW Analytics software, the Alteryx Connector for SAP, or ACS, is installed as plugins that work within Alteryx Designer on the desktop, and as a plugin onto Alteryx Server if you're looking to automate your processes. And therefore, our tools allow us to access certain types of objects within those SAP systems. And I'll just take a few minutes just to cover off these so we're all on the same page. I'll work from left to right. From a finance perspective, actually, table data gives us the finest level of granularity available within an SAP system. And we support the ability to extract data from SAP Tables and table views. And you'll see in the far right of the diagram, that table tool also appears when we're talking about accessing SAP HANA views. Right? So finest level of granularity, and I'll show you some examples of how we work with this. The SAP Report tool and spool retool, excuse me, capability will work with our transaction codes, our reports, our ABAP reports, both standard and custom within the SAP system. And the nice thing about working with, say, the report tool, when we're interacting with SAP from Alteryx, is that we not only consume the data from those tables, but also we consume the business logic that's built into those transaction codes. And it's a big accelerator for a lot of our users. The report tool offers a lot of flexibility in terms of building out workflows. The spool retool does a similar thing, works a similar way, but it requires you to run a transaction in the background from within the SAP system, and we hook into that spool and grab the data and pull it into Alteryx, and we'll talk more as we go. We still, a lot of customers of SAP still make heavy use of the SAP Query capability. So if you know your transaction codes, these would be things like SQ01, SQ02, SQUIVs, SQVIs. So these are reports that are delivered either by SAP or been built within your business for consumption directly within the SAP platform without having to go to, say, BW for the data. Slightly more technical in nature, we have the ability to extract data from BAPIDs and RFC-enabled function modules. We see this being used a little bit within finance, not so much. We won't focus too much on this today, but be aware that if you do have BAPIDs that provide you the data you need, or if there are RFC-enabled function modules that provide the data you need, we have the ability to access that data. If any of you are using maybe S/4HANA Cloud Edition, so this is targeted really at the SME end of the market, then OData is the way to go, and we support the access and extraction of data through the OData standard. A lot of our customers are increasingly using our document tools to extract attachment data from the SAP system. So imagine I have a purchase order or sales order or even an invoice PDF, and that's been uploaded into SAP and attached to a piece of master data, maybe against a vendor or a customer, or against a piece of transaction data. It could be a GL posting, sales order, purchase order. What some of our users need to do as part of their reporting process is get access to those attachments. Now today, they'd have to go into SAP one screen at a time and download that data to get that, say, that PDF. What we can do using our tools through Alteryx is get into the system, identify where there are attachments against master data or transactional data objects, and extract that data and effectively reconstruct those PDFs and locate them wherever you want to, okay, for offline review. In the BW world, we work with BW Queries and query views, and there's a lot of standard content delivered around financial reporting in SAP BW, which your organizations may be using today or have adapted in some way. We also support the extraction of data from info providers. So these are the objects that sit below the query in the BW stack, if you have authorization to access them. And I also mentioned the fact that we can also use this BW read tool to extract data from like calculation, analytic views from within SAP HANA. And over the top right there, I've also got there our SAP RPA tool, RPA bot. We did a webinar a week or so ago on this, so we won't talk about that today, but that operates at the user interface layer and allows you to run processes directly via SAP GUI or maybe via Fiori screen, either to extract data or maybe to update data into SAP. So check on our website if you're interested in that. Okay, so let's start with the table data. As I mentioned previously, table data gives us the finest level of granularity available in any SAP system. And when we talk about accessing data from SAP Tables, I should just emphasize here that as a software product, the DVW ACS never, ever, ever hits the underlying database directly. So we don't care whether you're running SAP HANA, DB2, Oracle, SQL, we don't care, right? We don't actually do anything at the database layer. And that means that we respect the governance within your SAP system around accesses to data, controls, and so on and so forth. So it's a really nice way to connect. So our table data would be analogous to using the data browser transactions. Technically, we do it in a slightly different way, but it's analogous to using the data browser transactions. So these would be transactions like SE16, SE16N, or some Z variant that has been custom built within your environments. And using our table data read tool, we are able to search for any standard or custom tables available within the given SAP system. And we support the extraction of data from a whole range of different types of tables. We have here in the slide transparent, pooled, clustered, along with the SAP HANA views. And this particular capability will also allow us to extract data from HANA CDS views. And when we identify a particular table we're interested in, we bring that data into Alteryx, the metadata associated with that table. And as a user, you can select the fields you want to include in your extract. You can apply filters to those fields and so on and so forth. So if we consider a real common example, my screenshots from SAP are all GUI today rather than Fiori, but the same applies. If you are using a Fiori type user interface, the same principles apply. On the left-hand side of the screen here, we have a screenshot from the GL document display transaction, T-Code FB03. And all documents in the SAP system have header data and item data at the very least, and some may have sub-item data and so on and so forth. Now, in the SAP system, if I'm talking about SAP ECC, this core data manifests itself in two key tables. There's a header level table, a table called BKPF, and a segment or item level table, a table called BSEG. Right? So if I want to be able to, if like, reconstruct those GL documents within Alteryx, then I need to be at least able to extract data from those two key tables. Okay, so if I just come to my Alteryx system here, so this is Alteryx Designer. For those of you who haven't seen it before, and Alteryx comes with many 260 odds, they're called building blocks or tools that perform very specific functions to transform, blend, analyze data. When the DVW ACS software is installed, a series of other menu bars will appear from within your Alteryx Designer, right? And these relate to our various read tools to extract data, our write tools that allow us to write data back into SAP. We won't focus on that at all today. Our tools that work with the customer experience solutions, success factors, business objects, integrated business planning, as well as our little RPA bots. But we'll stick with the read tools today. Now, a lot of you will already seen this particular workflow before if you've seen any of our other demonstrations or webinars. And there's a reason why we always show this. We show this particular workflow because it gives you a pattern for how to optimally extract data from SAP tables. Okay, so I'll just walk you through this workflow. I've pre-run it. Those of you already using our software on the call today will recognize maybe the absence of a macro in this kind of area of the screen here, and I'll explain the reason for that in just a second. But let's just go from the basics. So this particular workflow, we're going to extract data from the BKPF table, and based upon the data we've extracted from that particular table, we want to selectively extract data from the segment table, the BSEG table. All right. Now these tables can become absolutely huge, so it's important that we design our workflows as optimally as possible. So let's just start. Firstly, all of our workflows using the ACS products will have an SAP logon tool, and this is effectively creates the bridge between Alteryx and your SAP systems. And the type of information we need to connect your SAP system is no more and no less than you'd have if you have SAP Logon Pad installed on your desktop. Now, we don't require you to have SAP Logon Pad or SAP GUI installed on your desktop, but it's the same sort of information we need. What is the application server name? What is the system ID? What is the client we're going to access? All right. And if I look at my settings here, I'm just connecting to a single ECC system here. I've actually entered a username and password into the credential area here. Some of our customers will use single sign-on, and we fully support single sign-on. I'm not. This is a username and password based authentication. But I could have chosen any number of the different SAP systems available to me within my environment. And some of you will have actually massive SAP estates. You'll have large numbers of ECC systems, a few S/4HANA systems perhaps, in addition to BW, and amongst a proliferation of other SAP products. So this allows me to establish the connectivity. Then what I want to do then is I just dragged onto my canvas within Alteryx our table data tool. And the table data tool allows me to freely search for any tables available in the system. As I mentioned earlier, these can be standard or custom tables. Okay, and each time we're requesting data, we're making a real-time call back to the SAP system, and this will provide us with that particular data. So here I've just looked for anything relating to materials management. So that's not what we want to do today. When the table data is retrieved, we bring back all the key fields as well as any of the data fields. We also highlight where we have any secondary indexes. Yeah, this can actually, where you apply filters that match those secondary indexes. These have been previously defined within your SAP environment. We can really optimize the export time of data. And we can also apply filters to the data. within the extract as well, right? Any number of different filters. So this particular workflow is already run. So when it's run, it's gone away and it's selected the data from this particular table, selected the fields I've chosen here, and based upon the filter criteria I selected. In my case, I just said bring back data for fiscal year 2019. And on this D port here, I can see the output from that. Now that gives me half the story. So what we're doing in the second part of the workflow is we're first passing the data extracted from the BKPF table through to this Alteryx join tool, right? And in the bottom branch of the workflow, we're using another one of our tools called an ACS filter tool, and this will feed in the data extracted from the BKPF table in blocks of 8,000 records at a time into the item level table. And this way we can kind of iterate around, right, and get large volumes of data out of the system very, very efficiently. We then pass our selection criteria, which is effectively the data extracted here, into the BSEG table, and then we get the output from that. So we only get the relevant data. We then pass that data to this Alteryx join tool, where I'm joining on the shared keys, which are company code, document number, and fiscal year. And if I go further along the workflow a little bit, I'm using a few Alteryx tools here to convert these technical names into something a little bit more human readable. So what we can do quite quickly, and with a very consistent workflow pattern, is build workflows that can very efficiently pull data from multiple different tables within the SAP system. Now, those of you who are currently using our software, you may say, what happened to this macro here? Because previously we're using macros to feed data into the BSEG table. What we wanted to do is to basically make the construction of a workflow using the ACS simpler. So we have now removed the need for macros in the latest release, and we'll announce that shortly. And it has two benefits. One is simpler workflow design. Secondly, and a really happy side effect, is that we've seen a very significant improvement in the performance by removing the need for the macro in our particular workflows. So we've been in touch with all our current trial and paid users as soon as this new version is available for download. But once it becomes available, I'll strongly encourage you to make use of it. Okay, so we have a pattern for extracting data from those tables very efficiently. And we can pull very large volumes of data from these tables. Some of our customers are pulling tens, if not hundreds of millions of rows of data from that BSEG table in particular, and they do it in a very performant manner. So a couple of other things to mention here. Our tools all have this little S port here for selections. So what this opens up is the possibility for us to dynamically feed in selection criteria or filters into our tools. So if I'm going to be running this particular workflow on a regular basis, and particularly if I'm going to schedule this on Alteryx Server, I don't want to have to manually change the fiscal period each month, week, whatever it may be. Yeah. So what we can do is we can use other Alteryx tools, maybe a formula tool to calculate current date or current fiscal period. So at runtime, when we run the workflow, we automatically bring back the data that we need based on current date. We can use similar techniques to pull data based upon changes that have been made. We use things like the CD pos, CD header tables to identify where a record has changed within a period of time. So if you strongly encourage you to research or investigate the use of these kind of dynamic selections, which can really help you to automate these particular workflows. Okay, so what if I have an environment where I have multiple different SAP systems, and I'd like to be able to extract data from all of those and consolidate those in a single Alteryx workflow? So this is essentially the same workflow as I've just shown you. Again, we're pulling the BKPF BSEG data, but here we just have two patterns now. We're using the same pattern in both SAP systems. And if I look over here at my logon tool, you see now I have two, in this case, SAP ECC systems that I want to extract my data from. Yeah. So any number of SAP systems can be connected to from within a single Alteryx workflow using the ACS. Right. And so for those with large estates, I think this could be very, very helpful and a big time-consuming activity for you. And then we'll just use some of the Alteryx capability here to merge that data together again into a single output. And what I do with that then is really up to you. Yeah. And just one final example here. Again, that same workflow as the base, where we're using here some of the Alteryx interface tools. So if I was going to publish this to gallery, and it wasn't going to be run automatically, but I wanted a user to be able to enter their SAP credentials and then execute the report ad hoc, then this workflow can also be defined as an analytic app, and from that app it can be published up to the gallery. And here we feed in things like our SAP system, we grab the user name, enter the password, which of course will be encrypted, and feed that into the logon tool. So at runtime, that user's credentials are used and they can run the workflow and get the data output that's meaningful to them. Okay, so hopefully that gives you some ideas. Come back to our presentation. Okay, so that's the workflow there, and I should just also add this, and all the workflows I'm showing today are available on the Alteryx public gallery. If you just search for DVW, you'll find them up there, and they're freely downloadable. You just need the ACS software to be installed locally. Okay, so what about T-codes, transaction codes? So this is where you want to consume that business logic directly. Maybe I'm not familiar or not comfortable in how the tables are structured in an SAP system, or perhaps the business or the IT team have defined a particular report that I want to run on a regular basis. The only problem is I want to consume that data within Alteryx. So we have two tools that allow us to consume transaction code data. Firstly is our report tool, right? And this uses T-codes, ABAP reports, and it gives us a lot of flexibility. And I'll show you some examples later on in terms of that. So this allows us to then work with standard and bespoke SAP transactions and ABAP reports. We can work with transaction and report variants. I'll share a couple examples of these. We have the opportunity to preview the data before running our workflows, and also the tools give us the capability for us to clean up that data, because in SAP, the output for the transaction codes can be very variable. Different teams developed the outputs over a number of different years, so they can be a little bit inconsistent. So we give you a chance to firstly clean up that data, make sure it's working correctly, presented well before you run your workflows and pull the data into Alteryx. And if needed, extra cleaning can be done directly within Alteryx. The spool retool is also available, as I said before. This is where we'll run a transaction in the background. So the spool is the old print spool. Not used so much these days, but I run a program in the background. It writes the output to the spool, and then I can dip in, grab that data, and pull it into Alteryx. In the demos, I'll show you more about the report tool because it gives us more flexibility, but be aware you also have the ability to pull data from the spool. And here's one classic example here, the vendor line item display transaction, FBL1N. On the left-hand side, we have the data input. On the right-hand side, we have that classic output, and it's okay on screen, but not really conducive to downstream analytics within Alteryx. So what we're looking to do is to get that data as easy as possible into format for you to use. Okay, and so stand by, I'll show you some examples in the next few minutes. And then of course, we have to talk about BW. As I mentioned, there's a lot of standard financial reporting content in BW. Maybe your organizations would rather you access the data from BW. So our BW retool has two key capabilities, if you like. One is we can extract data from our queries and query views. We can extract data from our info providers. It also allows us to extract hierarchy data and present it in a nice flat tabular format ready for use within your Alteryx analytics. Okay, so let me just maybe flip to an example here. So here we go, output from SAP BW on the left-hand side of the screen, what it looks like on the right-hand side once we work with it within Alteryx. So I'll just show this very, very quickly. Let's move this little guy here. Okay, so here I'm connecting to an SAP BW system. I can freely choose any of the queries, query views, or info providers that I'm authorized to access. We show the history of previous things you've worked with, any favorites and folders, as well as the ability for you to freely search. I've already selected this. I'll run it a second. So once I've chosen my particular query, we bring back the metadata associated with that query, and that includes the characteristics at the top part and the key figures down the bottom part here. Based upon the definition of the query, we have certain characteristics and key figures have been pre-populated. I can override those here for the purposes of my Alteryx workflows. We also highlight where there are any mandatory filters that need to be defined before the workflow can be run. These have been pre-populated, so nice colored green. I've satisfied the requirement. When you first see this, they'll be in a red kind of color. And then over and above the ones that are defined by the design of the query, we can also apply additional filters as well within here. So a lot of scope within the query capability. If I just run this quickly, just so you can see it churning away. And then we have 3 outports on the BW read tool. The top one and the bottom one, I think, are the most interesting. Is that just finished? Yeah, good. Okay, so the top one through the D port provides us with the query data in a format that I can start working with within Alteryx. The bottom one provides us with the hierarchy data. So we support balanced hierarchies as well as unbalanced hierarchies. So you can see this one looks a bit ragged. This is an unbalanced hierarchy I'm showing you here. And we support up to 20 levels, like 25 levels of hierarchy. But we always provide a leaf node. Now, the meaning of the leaf node will be dependent upon the context of the hierarchy. This is a product hierarchy, and therefore the leaf node represents the product. So what this means for us is that when we're looking to do maybe some aggregations of data or summarizations of data, it's quite easy for me to join the output from the core query with the different levels of the hierarchy I'm interested in to get those levels of summarization that I'm interested in. And I'll just use maybe a join tool from Alteryx to do that. All right. Very widely used, very rich functionality. Okay, so let's look at a few examples. So a lot of the examples I'll show you will just be about saying, listen, here's data from SAP, here's data from SAP, but what we're all working towards is to deliver end-to-end use cases. So here's an example we have really focused around vendors and payment terms. And what we're looking to do here is do a few things within this particular workflow. We're looking to identify where we may have some master data misalignments. So which of our vendors have no payment terms? Where have they not been maintaining the payment terms? And to do this, we're using our table data tools again, and we're looking at the core, if you like, vendor master record tables. We're starting with the LFB1 table, where we should have the payment terms should be defined, and we're also combining that with the LFA1 table, which is the sort of general data associated with the vendor. With this, you're using some basic joins within Alteryx here to identify which of our vendors have no payment terms, right? Simple, but value there. Here, we're looking to see which of our payment terms are actually being used. And again, we're looking at the LFB1 table, one of the key vendor tables. We're doing some summarization of the data here to say, oh, actually, looks like we're only using one payment term in our system. Okay, maybe not a realistic scenario, but it's true in our little demo environment. Which payment terms have duplicate conditions? So here we're going into the configuration data tables to see where we have payment terms which are broadly the same. So sometimes when your SAP system is first being implemented or upgraded, the project team can get a bit overexcited. You may find that they're building configuration entries that may not be required, or maybe they've been inherited from previous systems. So what we're doing here is highlighting where unnecessary payment terms have been modified, maintained in the SAP system, and this gives us the ability to maybe decide on some sort of realignment. And for that, we could maybe use some of our write tools within Alteryx to say, listen, okay, these are the payment terms that we're going to now use. So if you see this payment term against a vendor, replace it with the primary one. And that we could use our IDOC tool, we could use the BW Write tool, we could even use our RPA bots to do that kind of thing. And finally, bottom one here, identifying, okay, so which of our payment terms don't make any sense? So where's the disconnect between the payment terms and the configuration of those payment terms? So this is just a simple example, right? So ultimately, we're looking towards delivering end-to-end use cases using Alteryx, using the DVW ACS software. All right, so let's look at something a bit more tangible, classic tax reporting transaction. So this is the advanced return for tax and sales and purchases. The left-hand side of the screen is the standard data entry, where you enter your selection criteria. And on the right-hand side, we have the output. Now, our systems aren't very big, so they'll have a laughably shallow amount of data coming out of them, but you'll get the idea. So what can I do within Alteryx? So if I just come over here, this one here. Okay, great. So quite a simple little workflow, but it's quite a powerful one. So let's go to my SAP system just to create the picture. So here we go. Here's the transaction. All right. Now, like all good people, I've defined some variance against this transaction because I'm running this on an ongoing basis. Okay, and I've defined one that'll allow me to select my input tax items and another one my output tax items, just to see segregation of the two things. So if I choose this here, right, then my various filter criteria have come across, and I run the query, and I get this output here. So this is quite a clean output, but still I like to clean a bit further before I use it within the Alteryx environment. So this workflow then has two branches. I'm connected to my SAP system in the way I've shown you previously. If I show you this here, and let's make a bit of space. So I've entered the name of the transaction code, right? And sometimes the transaction code is sufficient. Sometimes you'll need to enter the technical name of the transaction, the ABAP report ID. We've gone away and it's found out the technical name of that. That's just kind of by the by. And it's also identified the fact that we have some variants predefined for this transaction. So when I'm using this SAP report tool, I have two choices. I can either consume my data via the variant I've defined and selected, or I can manually enter the selection criteria within Alteryx in a similar way as I would do within the SAP system. So if I just do a raw preview of the data here. Okay, so I can now put something like this. All right, now this has already been color coded, and I'll explain that in just a second. But this output here is basically the output I'm getting here. All right, so within our tool, before we even start using any of the Alteryx tools to further cleanse that data, we have the ability to sort of hide certain fields, ignore certain fields. Yeah, there's a lot of junk sometimes in these SA reports that, again, useful on screen, but not useful within Alteryx. So we can simply ignore these types of fields. There's a whole bunch of fields here I've chosen to ignore, and these are all the fields in the dark, the sort of light gray color. I also have some repeating tables. This one's quite simple, it just has one. And so I've identified this as being the header row, where maybe I'd have data for multiple different company codes, and each one would really be represented in SAP with a different table. Okay, so I have the ability to use different tools and techniques within here to clean up my data. And I can review and preview the data as I go. Once I'm happy with that, I can say, listen, do a proper preview of this. So based upon the configuration. So when I come to actually run the workflow, here I've got two report tools. One's going to grab the input tax line items, one's going to grab the output tax line items and present them to me. Okay, the data I get back from SAP is immediately useful to me further downstream in my analytics. Yeah, there's the input and there's the output. So very commonly used transaction code, very easy for us to work with within Alteryx. Right, where's my slide gone? Okay, So that's one example for tax reporting, and there are lots of others, of course. There are many tax reporting based transactions in the system. What about asset lifecycle reporting? Well, I could go to Tables, I could go to BW potentially, I could go to T-Codes. Here, I've chosen to work with a query. So this is the SQO1, SQO2 squivy type of transaction. On the left-hand side, I have the filter settings for my depreciation report. On the right-hand side, I have the output for my depreciation report. Within Alteryx, where's it gone? Here we go. I now bring on our SAP Query retool onto the canvas here. Okay. Again, I could use variants, or I can enter selection criteria, the filter criteria based on that report. Okay, use one or the other. Yeah. I've previously chosen the particular query, and I've selected the fields that I want to be incorporated in my output. So when I run this particular query, I'm talking to the SAP system. It's saying, yes, Darren has access to this particular query. Let's run it. I'm now grabbing the data back from the SAP system. We started doing a bit of work with it within the Alteryx environment, just so I get some meaningful output. And what I see here, this table here, is essentially the same as I got here, but it's immediately available to me for use within Alteryx. Okay, and that's the workflow. What about management reporting, controlling? Classic transaction code, KSB1, display the actual cost line items for cost centers. On the left-hand side of the screen, I have my selection criteria. On the right-hand side of the screen, I have the standard SAP output from that. Again, we can deal that with a workflow. Okay, even simpler workflow this time, connected to my SAP system. I'm using the SAP report tool again. I could have gone for tables, I could have gone for BW, I could have gone for query. I've identified the transaction code I'm interested in. I've also chosen to select a variant, but I could also manually enter my filter criteria here if I wanted to. Okay, we run the report. We communicate with SAP, validates, yes, Darren has access to this transaction code. Let's trigger the report based upon the filter criteria I specified and show me the result of it. So hopefully what you get a sense of here is there's nothing within the finance area of SAP that you can't work with in some way within Alteryx. Yeah, whether it be tables or transaction codes, ABAP reports, queries, and BW. There's a lot of scope for you to use this as your source. And what we've seen a lot with our customers is once Server comes into play and the ability to automate these processes or make these workflows available to people who have no idea about Alteryx, no idea really about SAP, other than the fact they have a login and password to it, and then but want to use the output from those workflows, you have a lot of scope for your reporting, and it can be a massive, massive accelerator for you. Okay, and there's just the basic one there. Final one, just to address another area, is around Treasury Management. And here we're pulling data from true transaction codes in a single workflow. So don't think that you can only be pulling data for one T-code. What a lot of our users will be doing is they may be pulling data from a transaction code initially, and then using the output of that to feed into a table tool, and from a table tool to feed into a BW query. So you can chain these things together, interspersed with all the various Alteryx capabilities to really develop quite substantial end-to-end Alteryx-based workflows, consuming and making use of your SAP data. Yeah. Okay, so here's the classic output from one of those transactions, the post and journal transaction, Treasury Management. Here's our workflow here, pulling data from 2 of those transactions. Okay, just to mention, to talk a little about quickly Server. So I think a lot of power does become when you start automating within Server. So what happens is Alteryx Designer doesn't go away, and our ACS for Alteryx Designer, that's the product that works when Alteryx Designer doesn't go away, and that may be all you need, right? You'll be quite happy. You're quite happy to run the workflows and to execute the workflows and the process as you need it to happen. But once you've built those, we have the ability to publish to Server, and then either as those apps I've mentioned, or for scheduling, and both become very, very powerful. So our ACS for Alteryx Server software would need to be installed on your Alteryx Server, and then either on demand or per the schedule, we trigger the workflow, we trigger the communication with the SAP system, we grab the data, we bring it back into Alteryx, and then that data is then used however the workflow has been designed. But we see a lot of power within that. Yeah, so here's an example of the vendor line item display transaction just being run ad hoc from within the server, almost like from gallery really. Okay, Alteryx, I know, are moving their public gallery into the Alteryx community, I think towards the end of the year, but if you do go to the Alteryx public gallery, search for DVW, you've got 50+ sample workflows up there. Some of them will meet all your requirements, some of them will help you, will give you guidance as to how the tools work. They're available to anybody with a license, paid or trial license, to freely download. I'd encourage you to look at them, particularly the GL one, the one I showed you at the top of the webinar there, because whether it's finance or areas outside of finance, the pattern for that particular workflow is quite common, it's quite consistent, and it'll help you get off to a good start with your workflow design. Okay, I think questions have been answered. Right, good. Okay, guys, so listen, I hope you found this interesting. You'll get an email tomorrow with a link to the recording. Please feel free to watch it again, relive the magic again, forward it to any of your colleagues who may find it of interest. If you're not working with us yet, please come to dvwanalytics.com. You can register for a trial of the software. If you are already working with us, thank you for your business, thank you for your support, and please check out the new Help Center. We've been publicizing it through various emails and content, but we have a lot of additional content on that to help you make the most out of investment of the ACS within Alteryx. So thank you.